Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About It. I am really excited. As always, all the talkers and speakers that we've had on here so far have been so insightful. I always do my best to make these intros and endings immediately after I've gotten off the chat. So I'm kind of just on a high of just being so excited with the insight and the wisdom that was shared. And I'm just so excited to share this particular episode with you today. I sat down with Jolene D'Entremont. She is a pretty well-known yoga instructor in Halifax. If you are living in the area, then I'm sure you guys already know who Jolene is. She is doing some really incredible things. She focuses a fair bit on, of course, yoga instruction in general, yoga teaching in general, but also does fertility or prenatal yoga classes. So prenatal yoga classes. She also does a lot of really cool breath work related practices, which I think is so important and is also something that I personally believe gets overlooked in yoga in terms of its actual importance in healing. So this is a really insightful conversation. We go through even talking about internal family systems, so IFS, mindset, trauma, childhood stuff, bringing it into adulthood, thoughts become things types of approaches. We do talk about fertility, or my goodness, I can't even say that right. Prenatal yoga. We do talk about prenatal yoga in the beginning as well, for any of you who are curious about prenatal yoga and what that looks like and how it is different from conventional yoga or typical yoga practices. Without further ado, I won't go into too much more detail about this. I just hope you guys enjoy this episode just as much as I did. And please don't forget to like this podcast, subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, and please share this with your friends if you feel like the message in the podcast would be beneficial to them. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and I'm really excited for this podcast chat today. I am here with Jolene D'Entremont. She is a yoga instructor in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and you've been teaching yoga for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how many years do you think it is now?
So my son will be 16, my youngest. I have 3, and he'll be 16. And I was pregnant, and he was born before I finished that teacher training.
Oh wow!
So he was with me nursing through the whole end of the teacher training experience that I had.
That's amazing.
16 years. Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yeah.
I remember. When did I meet you? It must have been like 8 or 9 years ago now. Mm-hmm. It was when I had first moved to Halifax. And I went to one of your yoga classes. And then we had lunch afterwards at Heartwood. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking about that this morning before we popped on, because it was just like, I felt so lonely when I first went to Halifax. Yeah. I knew nobody. It was kind of challenging for me just from that perspective of like kind of removing myself like from family and friends. And I was so grateful for our conversation, our chat, because you're such a open-hearted person and so easy to talk to. So I have to thank you for that first off, because it was really meaningful. Me.
Thank you for saying that. I felt like I didn't offer you very much. And I remember even we talked about how we might want to collaborate and I was so not in a place to be ready for that kind of thing. So oftentimes I actually think of that and I think, timing is everything. But here we are today having this conversation. So, but I remember it very fondly and connecting with you too, as your open-heartedness is very...
it's
beautiful.
Nothing happens by coincidence.
That's right.
Yeah, how I choose to see things. So it's good that we finally got to reconnect now.
I know.
So tell me a little bit about your journey into yoga. How did that get started for you?
So before my teacher training, I think it was, I was always curious about yoga. I think even as a young child, my mom used to go to like calisthenics classes and things, and I would beg to go with her. this woman from Boston with her Boston accent. I grew up in a rural town in Nova Scotia, so there are not a lot of offerings, And I think we had a book. It was the black and white 28 days of yoga. Do you know which one I'm thinking of, what I'm talking about?
No.
And it was, the pictures, black and white, and the description of what to do, how to do headstand, shoulder stand. Anyway, it was fascinating. So I would just used to practice on my own. And then I became pregnant and I searched out for my firstborn, who's going to be 21 next month.
Wow.
And that's when I started practicing, was because of being pregnant. I'd had a miscarriage before that, and I was running and doing all kinds of things. So I was looking for something less impact. I think I probably, like a lot of women do, sort of blamed myself on some level, like maybe I was too active, or I was seeking out something more calming, more sort of in touch with my body and more healing. And I discovered yoga at that point. So that's when I started the journey. And it's funny because, and then I did my teacher training with my third baby. So being pregnant, and that was such a valuable experience, being pregnant throughout that, to see like what are the changes and how do we need to adapt the body and what do we really need when we're pregnant, not just relaxation, but strength, and to get through labor and the pregnancy itself, and a calm mind, and really just centering yourself emotionally, spiritually, not just growing physically, but growing emotionally, growing spiritually, to meet the demands of this new being,
I love that.
Yeah, it started back then.
That's incredible.
And I haven't stopped doing training since then. I kind of actually dove right in after my 200 hours and did a 500 hours, and then did even more, another 300 hours, sort of sprinkled around different areas. Live, Love, Teach. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but in the US,
I've heard of them.
The Baptiste kind of model, and that was amazing. That was actually really quite where I think I learned, teaching spirituality in yoga. What does that look like?
Yes.
How do you actually teach yoga? What is that? That's presence and just being there.
Yeah, and I can understand that too, because there really is a big difference in a yoga class of someone who deeply understands that concept that you just mentioned, versus someone who is by rote memorization, like telling you to go through each pose.
Yeah,
like there's definitely a different feel to it.
Yeah, I think there's beauty in both of those things, because I have experienced amazing shifts and presence with teachers doing both. But I'm someone who cannot plan a class to save my life. You know what I mean? So I show up, I kind of read the room, and then go from there. I have never been able to plan. I might have a thought, about where I want to go in the class, but it never works out that way. So I kind of very spontaneous, and just sort of seeing what shows up in me, and it's sort of like channeling in a way. And my students become my object of meditation, let's say. And that's why I think for me, teaching is the most healing thing I think I've ever really experienced. Showing up and teaching is always an energy boost for me. It doesn't matter how I'm feeling. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter how I'm feeling when I show up. I could be exhausted or in a really bad mood or whatever, but I show up and I'm immediately brought back into kind of that presence that I'm talking about.
That's amazing. Yeah. And you have a new yoga studio, and you're still practicing or teaching out of another studio you mentioned?
I think I love the sense of teaching at other places. I do. Part of me is out of probably fear of leaving the community that I've built, or that other people have built, that I'm still part of. There's definitely, I told you right before our conversation started, that it's kind of, I'm 49 next month, and sort of starting new. It feels kind of intimidating and scary all at once. And I know I have students out there, but it's like, are they going to come? And I do love being a part of different communities. So I teach it on the mat. I teach at Luminate right now, which is a prenatal class. There's a need for that. So I want to serve the community as much as I can. So yeah, so I'm doing a little bit of all of that. So I just opened in November, the studio space here. Yeah.
Oh, so exciting.
So
it's such
fresh.
A beautiful space too.
It is a beautiful space. Yeah. It's very, it's just on Quimple Road above the Heartwood, which is where we had our first lunch together.
Yes.
Full circle. Right. Yeah. So I love the space. Feels great.
Amazing. Yeah. So you mentioned the prenatal yoga. Can you explain to us a little bit more about prenatal yoga? Mm-hmm. I know there are a lot of people out there who, perhaps like with fertility or becoming pregnant and post-pregnancy, have an interest in understanding about prenatal yoga and how helpful it can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Speaking of fertility, oftentimes over the years, the many years I've been teaching prenatal, I would often get women who wanted to become pregnant come to the prenatal classes. And I encourage that always, because it was a certain energy in the room. Like we did a lot of hip openers. We did a lot of sort of just grounding in the body, working with connecting in a different way, the way that I always teach prenatal for me is just arriving and allowing us to kind of connect. I used to call it like breathing for two. Instead of eating for two, you're breathing for two. So just allowing your body to really appreciate this growing new being, right? And allowing for that connection. So that's the number one priority for me when people come to the prenatal classes, is them sort of carving out some time just to connect with the baby using their breath. So just simple, always beginning with hand on belly, hand on heart, how do we create this internal connection and awareness? And then I'm not an easy yoga, like I don't go easy on them. Like I'm always, having had 3 babies, 2 of them at home, I know how difficult labor is. It's not a walk in the park. It's one of the hardest things I've ever experienced, obviously physically. So I love to prepare them physically as well. It's challenging. I make it challenging for them because I feel it's necessary for them to work with how do you deal with discomfort in the body, pain in the body using your breath? How can you not leave yourself when that happens? You know what I mean? Even just, I use the example, like you stub your toe and you just contract and everything contracts. And what I teach in my classes is how do you hold like warrior 2 for a long time, or even a wall sit or squat, and work through your breath and stay with your breath throughout that. So that's a lot of what I talk about in those prenatal classes. So I don't shy away from making it challenging, but there's definitely, obviously prenatal, we work with, everything is done very deliberately. Your feet are always belly width apart, for example. There's reasons why physically you would go to a class like that too. We don't twist. You don't lay on your belly. There's very common sense things, but oftentimes when you're in a class without a qualified prenatal instructor, that might get missed. You know what I mean? And, we don't jump back anymore in the first 14 weeks of pregnancy. The placenta, the baby's still kind of attaching itself to the wall. It's, it's very, not fragile, but, you want to be mindful of those kind of physical things, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I also recall a girl that I had met when I was doing my yoga teacher training. She actually had my medical lingo is going to like fly out of my head right now. The abdominal separation.
Oh, after the baby. Yes.
Yeah, because she was doing a lot of ab related exercises, during and very close to post pregnancy, which caused like the separation.
There's
the
there's a
abdominal.
technical term. I'm
Yeah,
not even gonna attempt to pronounce that
word.
word.
It'll pop in my head
Yeah.
after we're done talking.
I'm that yoga teacher who should have failed anatomy as far as terminology goes. So anyway, and also Sanskrit. But anyway, I'm good at English. So that is also a risk, right? That can happen anyway. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't want to lay that blame or whatever on someone having done a lot of abdominal work during pregnancy or abdominal exercises. But we do want to be mindful, of that. There's a time for that. Again, we are pregnant. It's a time to kind of yin rest, sort of balancing out that yin and yang and like creating space, but also strengthening. Like, I just feel like it's a perfect life analogy. You know what I mean? Being pregnant, it's like, it's full, it's rich, it's growing, it's expansive, and it's also, a time of anxiety and fear. And so there's so much to work with, there's so much going on. So I talk a lot about that and how, acknowledging those feelings as they come. I often share an experience with when I was pregnant with my third one and in labor, I often say too that, what you don't talk about or express stays stuck in the body. And, my daughter, I had a boy and a girl, and she really wanted a girl. And somewhere in the back of my mind, even though it wasn't there, like in the surface, I had this fear that she wasn't going to get her little sister, like that he would be a boy. I don't know what was going on. So it was like my labor just stopped at that moment, because I wasn't expressing this. My throat was tight and I was like, what is this? Anyway, so I kind of just expressed that to my midwife. And as soon as I let that out and that truth of that fear, like, oh my goodness, what if I'm not, what if it's a boy? And it's not that I had a preference in any way. Anyway, it was a boy and she adores him to this day. But it was sort of like just showing you how somatically in the body we hold tension, and that's just one example. But any of these fears, it's better to talk about them, especially before the baby arrives. So I encourage the women. It's more like a support group in a way. Like, I don't talk like that throughout the class, but I often offer also, I used to teach a yoga birth workshop, which is like a spirituality and birthing workshop. I did it with a midwife. So she did all the technical stuff of what is happening in birth. And I would do more, how do you prepare sort of emotionally and spiritually for that? And so I talk a lot about that as well. Open mouth, open bottom. I teach people how to relax the jaw and how that's actually very much connected to the pelvic floor. If your jaw is tight when you're having a contraction, how do you handle that? How do you deal with that? How do you breathe through those moments, right? Where you can relax the body.
That's incredible.
To help. Yeah, the baby's going to do what it's going to do. You don't have a lot of control over it, but the only thing you can control is your mind in that moment, and and the thoughts, and how you're breathing. And breathing is everything, in labor and in life, pretty much. If you're not breathing, you're not living. So, especially in labor, how can you relax your breath more? How can you relax your pelvic floor more? Unclench.
There's so many elements of that too that I'm like kind of taking and putting into everyday life as well, of like, one of my greatest like mysteries, I suppose, of the human body that I find fascinating is along the lines of what you were mentioning, where, like the clenched jaw, or like holding on to things, or these reflex moments, like you stub your toe and like your body flexes up. And it's interesting because it's like, that it, from the one standpoint, it's the body has an inherent ability to heal itself
and protect itself.
Yeah. And then it's like bringing in this other layer of us, the mind, coming in to, kind of oversee, like, where sometimes the body might be ODing on certain things.
Right. Or also just,
it's kind of fascinating, like the whole concept of it.
so many fascinating layers of all of it. And we hold once, it's just like trauma, the trauma may have happened, whether it be you stub your toe or, whatever it is, but the mind carries it forward. It's not happening right now, but our thoughts are happening right now in our minds. So we're there with it, and that creates, we're staying stuck in that cycle of the sympathetic nervous system continually being amped up, and so, I know this very well. I do it all the time. I catch myself and then I think, is this self that's leading right now? Or is this a part of me that's protecting another part of me that feels triggered?
Right.
And that's actually, I do coaching as well. So that's one of the things I work with my clients, is really allowing them to see the difference between being in self-leadership and being in other.
Yeah.
And self-leadership is curious and open, present, content, constant, still. And then the other parts of us are like in the sympathetic, I would say, and so we're constantly battling. They're kind of battling it out. I see it almost like this, Linus in what is that called? Oh my gosh, that little cartoon, Charlie Brown. And he used to walk around with the mud, mud all around him. That's kind of what I think about. It's like our minds are a little bit messy and dirty like that. It's but the self is pure and clear and open and always curious,
Yeah, that curiosity and looking at, and kind of that idea of something you had mentioned earlier too, that it kind of rang a thought in my mind about not looking at things the same way as you feel like you need to based on a past experience.
That's right.
It's like a Buddhist ideology where it's like you look at everything with fresh eyes. Otherwise, you're bringing in all this stuff from the past.
I have a hard time letting go of stuff. I will be the first to admit, I really drag it. I drag it around. I'm it's just part of whatever part of me feels the need to do that is very powerful and strong and overpowering. And when I feel connected, curious, that part is not operating. I feel like it's like an operating system. My operating system is very stubborn and digs in and is a little bit negative, insecure, whatever parts, and they're just all having it out,
Yeah.
And one of the ways, as you know, to get into the center, into the self, to open and be curious and connected is really yoga, breath work, whatever you choose, meditation, doing something you love, being in flow, right? Those moments where you're not preoccupied, and then your parasympathetic nervous system is engaged, right? And then you're not in fight or flight. Your life is not in danger, but we kind of go around our whole life is in danger just because of our thoughts. How crazy is that?
It is a little nuts. So it's a little, I'm going to use the word delusional.
It is. I think it is. It's very delusional.
Yeah.
But it's also, like you just said before, a very protective mechanism. And it's one of my teachers to say, it's not like we're being chased by the tiger, but, we have this innate sense that our self is not safe on some level. And we spend a lot of time creating sort of barriers to protect ourselves when really we don't need that, Yeah. But I do think it's innate. I think it's in us all to be very protective and of our territory, our children, or partners, or things,
Yeah. And I can totally relate to that too. Yeah.
I'll admit it. I'm fallible.
Yeah, likewise.
And also learning to love those parts too. That's the hard part, is that finding the compassion and curiosity around why those parts are the way they are. You know what I mean? Yes. And then treating them like your own little children, being more compassionate to yourself. That's the work.
It is. It really is. And I actually have come to realize that I, like you, hold on to things. I carry them with me. I've got a big suitcase full of stuff that, I just really have a hard time letting go of. Yeah. And I've always believed, for some reason, that I need to like almost obsess over these things, or like think about them a lot, or like really get into the nitty gritty of like over evaluating them in order to heal from them.
Right.
But I've kind of come to realize that I'm not so convinced that that's actually the way that you move on from things.
No.
Right? Because then it's like, even from a biochemical perspective, it's like you're rewiring like a pathway that maybe you should just not rewire.
Right. So how do we get around that?
Yeah.
I think one thing, you can't really get around it, but one way you can kind of create a wider pathway that is softer to that, like that superhighway of connecting to those thoughts that are kind of ruminating, or that heavy suitcase, is then to just look at it in a different way, is to then look at that part of you without shaming. I did this work this weekend on my own, kind of like I was getting acupuncture actually, and I had this insight. I was like, there's a part of me that really loves to shame. And I just spent a little bit of time getting to know her, this little shaming part. And I realized she's just protecting a little part of me, another part of me that feels kind of like tucked away and scared, that is not good enough, or doesn't deserve love, or whatever, and so to keep the narrative that she's created around that, whatever she taught, that part of me was taught that years ago to survive, maybe, she has to keep that narrative going. It's part of that ego part, right? It's very Jungian, perhaps. I find that fascinating. Like, this is my favorite work of all time. It's sort of shadow work, right? It's like really befriending the shadow. And and that work I've been doing for a long time. I studied with Debbie Ford. I don't know if you remember Debbie Ford. She passed away a few years ago. She wrote a book with Deepak Chopra.
Okay, I was just going to say her name sounds familiar to me.
She wrote The Light Side of the Dark Side of the Light Chasers. She wrote The Shadow Effect with Deepak Chopra. So I went to Copenhagen to do a 5-day silent retreat with her before she passed away. So I feel very fortunate. And that was something else. That was a lot. It was a lot of meeting your shadow, a lot of anger. And like, I was that person, I am not angry. I don't have anger, but it was like a lot of denial about my anger. I still am in denial about my anger. So, it's just sort of like, but when you wake up, like, I often look at people who are kind of like, everything's great, and I think, oh, wow, must be nice. A little bit of oblivion, I'm so hyper aware, I think. Like, I overthink and I overfeel, and I, if there is such a thing. So sometimes I'm envious of those who really are kind of more asleep, maybe. That's not an insult, but it's more like just, oh, that's nice.
Yeah, that must be nice.
That must be nice. A lot of my clients say the same thing. It's like, oh, once you kind of wake up to these parts, it feels like kind of lonely work, but it really is. It's like you alone are the one doing that work, but it helps you to be better at relationships. Hopefully it helps you to show up for your clients better, for yourself, really, because your most important relationship you're ever going to have is the one you have with yourself.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also, have you ever heard of A Course in Miracles before?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I find, it's a holographic writing, right? Where like a lot of it, there's a lot of metaphors. It's not the easiest text to read.
No.
But there's also another book called The Disappearance of the Universe. Have you heard of that one before?
I have not, but I'm going to look it up now.
Yeah, by Gary, I can't remember his last name right now. But yeah, it's called The Disappearance of the Universe. And it's a really interesting book because it's basically him having a conversation with some beings that came to hang out with us.
Almost like an Esther and Jerry Hicks, kind of like an Abraham, or
no, not like
Joshua.
It's interesting though, because they're basically helping to translate, if you will, the text into something that is a lot more digestible, if you will, or like the main messages of Course in Miracles. And I'm reading the book again for a second time, so it's very like top of mind for me. But the one thing that it talks about is how we all project unconscious guilt and fear onto others. So it's like
everyone is our mirror.
Everyone is our mirror. Yeah.
And blaming other people is like blaming yourself, right? So it's a continuous cycle of, and when you wake up to that though, it's good news, right? Because then you take responsibility and you grow up, and it's hard to grow up sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And one of the ways that they talk about in it, to work through that is by forgiveness.
I was going to ask you that question. I said, what do you think is the main message of the Course in Miracles? And that was
forgiveness.
It's forgiveness.
And it's just like, the forgiveness of the self and of others. And I mean, it obviously doesn't happen overnight.
I think I have a really hard time with that too. And I think because I have a hard time forgiving myself. So forgiving others sometimes feels like, oh, I have to actually know what it's like to forgive myself. So that's been my work actually for the last couple of years, last 2 years, which again might be a segue for you when you wake up to more sobriety on many levels, right? It's you do have to wake up to all the feelings that you have, and that they're all really safe inside of you.
And actually, I think that's let's start talking about that, because that's how we kind of like how this podcast came to be. It was out of the conversation that Vanessa and I had on the podcast a couple weeks ago, just about that whole journey to sobriety. And I find it really fascinating too, that like you guys are active yoga instructors. Like there's definitely like a yogic, synchronicity, if you will, between all the three of us. So I thought that was kind of fascinating as well. But share your experience on that.
Well, the first time I drank, I think I was 14. Again, growing up in that small town, out of sheer boredom or numbing, which is what we do to not feel what we're really experiencing, in the moment. And so it became sort of a pattern, of I wouldn't call it being alcoholic, but definitely could drink and would drink to forget or to fit in or for whatever reason, name your reason. And being 49 now, that's a long time of, so just before my 47th birthday, it was Christmas Eve of 2019, before the pandemic even started. So the bliss of that, not knowing what was coming, I took my last drink on the 24th of December of 2019. And it was sort of a pivotal moment for me because I was, probably doing it at a family gathering where there was a lot of stress involved and just, wanting to kind of escape the feelings that I knew were inevitable at that particular event. And my partner at the time looked at me and he just said something like, this is not like, what is happening, and it was a feeling of shame probably too. And also just a feeling of like, what is happening, maybe backwards. I had gone to a party actually before that, a 50th birthday party, and where the next day after drinking, not a lot, but enough, I was so sick the next day, like for days. I threw up. It was almost like I had ingested poison and my body was purging this. So that 24th of December, I had only a few, but I felt the same way the next day. And I thought, I didn't even drink that often. I didn't drink every day, but when I did, I went hard. Like, I couldn't just have like one. I had to have the whole bottle. And, I'd be like sitting around with my kids. I'd be like, oh, let me open this bottle. Like, okay, let me have the whole thing. I couldn't just have the one glass, at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
So Christmas night, I'm with a friend and we go to an AA meeting because he attends them. And yeah, and I listen to their stories and how for them, it was not a choice. They didn't have the choice to not drink anymore, where I realized I could actually in that moment decide like, okay, I don't have to do this. I don't need this. I
Right.
don't want this. And so from that moment forward, I just decided. And when I talk to people about this, and maybe you can relate on some level, maybe on some other, um, relate on some other level, but it's like a part of my house inside of me. Like I'm a temple, in yoga, you'll understand this, that your body is your temple.
Mm.
It's like a room in my house locked. I've lost the key. It's like it's now disappeared. I don't have access to that room anymore. That's how much alcohol has just disappeared from my life. I don't have a desire for it. I never think about it. I could go out for dinner and all my girlfriends are drinking. I never have the thought, oh, I wish I could have a drink right now or I want one.
Yes.
It's just like it almost miraculously, and I want to call it a little bit of a miracle because I may have prayed for this, but is just that it just has no control or bearing on my life at all anymore. And that room is locked and gone. It's disappeared.
That's incredible. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times, just from my conversations with people too, about, making the choice to not drink anymore. A lot of like the common comments around that is like, oh, well, that sounds so boring, or like, oh,
Right.
like I would never do that because, it's like, there's just like this like mistrust that you're capable. I mean,
Of
not
being fun
having a
and
drink. Yeah.
having fun and being
Yeah.
interesting or whatever. So that's like, again, the part of the self that these other parts that are not the self, that are conditioned probably like culturally, that, and especially through the pandemic, was fascinating to watch this culture explode, and on social media, all I saw was, oh my God, is it 9 o'clock now? 3 o'clock, mummy time, like these big wine glasses, and all great, I think. But people may want to look at how we're conditioned
Yes.
into believing that we need that thing
Yes.
to feel good, feel better, feel connected, whatever that is. It's all false, delusional, marketing.
Yeah, totally.
A huge grand scheme of marketing.
Yeah. I actually had noticed too a little while ago that, like sitcoms in the 90s,
Yes.
like Friends,
Yes.
Seinfeld, they all hung out at a coffee shop or a diner. Like no one was sitting there at the bar having drinks. Like they were all drinking coffee together.
Yeah.
Even when they were in Monica's house, like they were drinking coffee. I love
that. Yes, they were popping the champagne bottle.
Is that not odd though? Because now it's like this, like more modern day, like sitcoms, TV shows, what have you. It's the hangout spot is the bar. It's not the coffee shop, it's the bar. So it's even being like showed to us in like more lighthearted, almost, if you will, mindless, like media that, it's socially acceptable to, drink alcohol.
The mummy wine culture and the advertisements are all very geared towards that. It's like maybe the modern day Valium. I hate to say it, but like think of the 50s and how they marketed that to, doctors did, I guess, but to moms who were maybe at home, whatever. I mean, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole of thoughts perhaps, but anyway, I, for myself, really taking ownership of my own body and my own choices that I made. I can tell you that now I wake up more clear. I wake up feeling a lot more. I've never cried as much in my life as I have in the last 2 years because I feel every damn last thing. Yeah. And I let myself feel it. So I have cried and cried. I've purged a lot of the baggage. I still have some carrying on. I still got some carry on, but I definitely have probably released some suitcases of baggage. I feel like I wake up without puffy eyes. I feel like I still have fun when I go out. I just feel better. My skin is great. Jillian. And it's not just my skincare regime.
Yay.
Yoga probably helps. And I love my body oil.
Oh, amazing.
My cool oil. So, there's so many benefits for me anyway. And it's just a choice that I made. And I just feel very clear, very conscious, the choices I make. You know how, when you're making choices when you're drinking, it's like, ooh,
yeah,
I don't know. Like, yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. Those happen in other times, but maybe not because I've been drinking. So I'm the only person to blame for it.
Yeah, I can understand that. Was it difficult for you in the beginning? Like, was there a period of time where you were just like, oh man, like, why did I make this decision that I wasn't going to have that glass of wine? Or
no, you know what? That's what I'm saying. The miracle is that it wasn't. And I know that might, for some people, be enraging. But dry January, for example, people often, so that's kind of how it began. I thought, oh no, I'm going to take the month, and I think it started for me more like, I can do anything for a month, like no big deal. I do cleanses. I can, not have coffee for 10 days, which is that's probably harder for me, to be honest, than not having alcohol. So it was not difficult. And I know that's going to be, there was I don't know if there's a secret remedy for this. I just know that for me, that's what happened. And I think I prayed on it. Honestly, I asked for help. And if you go to an AA meeting, that's what they say. There's a higher power. You don't need to do it yourself. You don't need to ask for yourself to do it at all. You just need to ask for guidance or help, from your higher power. And on some level, I do that for a lot of things now, because I've seen the results of that, and that does sound very woo, but it works. I don't go to AA meetings. I don't feel like, because I wouldn't have branded myself as an alcoholic, but I think I could have been.
Yeah.
The propensity for, I have other addictive qualities.
Yeah. I think, like a human condition has addictive qualities, like whatever that path is that, seems to be what you're going to walk down.
It's a numbing, a distraction of feeling into presence, and when presence feels uncomfortable. And lately my theme in my yoga class is actually, Jillian, and maybe if you still teach, right?
No, I ended up never teaching. I taught one class.
You never taught? Oh my gosh. I thought you were teaching all this time.
No, I mean, I did some online. I had I called it the yoga lab, and it wasn't online. So I taught people how to like do poses, and I did have, some yoga instruction, but like, that's as far as I ever went.
Oh my God. You're so good at it.
Thanks.
I thought you had
maybe I should get
loads of
students.
Yeah, I think you could. Where was I going with that? I was just thinking, in my classes lately, my theme has been, finding comfort in stillness. So oftentimes we do not feel comfort in stillness ever. It's like we find it very hard. I teach yin classes here on Sunday nights, and one of the three components of yin class is the stillness part, right? It's like you go in and at an acceptable, depth of the pose, you use your breath, use props, you do whatever, you also find stillness. And that's the most challenging part of the yin class for me anyway. It's just being able to sit still in that discomfort and use your breath to kind of meet the tension there, and for me too, it's teaching my students to find comfort in themselves, in that stillness, finding comfort in their breath, the sound of their breath, so that it's always there. It's always a way to ground back into anchor into your body. How do you anchor in your body? And right now, is your life in danger, because of this? It's usually a thought that is creating the havoc in our minds and our bodies. And if you really look for that thought, you can't find it, right? The Course in Miracles would say the same thing. It's like, it's not there, it's look for it. Where is it?
Yeah. That's actually, I love that you mentioned that, because I guess for those of us listening right now, we'll do a really quick overview of Yin and Yang.
Yes.
Yeah. In yogic traditions, in Asian medicine, all that type of stuff, that Yang is like more higher energy, masculine energy, almost like fire, if you will. It's
closer to the surface.
Yes. Yeah.
To the sun.
Yeah. And I find, yeah, just when you were saying about the yin, which is like more feminine and grounding, yeah, like a slower movement, if you will, like more opportunity for reflection, versus yang, I feel like, is more opportunity for distraction.
Yeah.
And I think
and action as well, and
yeah,
action, right?
yeah,
You
that's
you
right.
get shit done in yang, which,
Exactly. And you
you
need
know,
both.
we need
You
both.
need yin and you
You
need
need both.
yang.
You do. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the society we live in really puts a very heavy emphasis on yang, on like that perceived masculine, and totally forgets that, you know, even with the yin yang circle, like there's a little tiny dot of the black in the white, and the white tiny dot of the white in the black. So it's like you need
and it's a
both.
circle.
It's a circle.
So it's a constant, you know, there's a never ending continuous cycle. And until we actually take the time to slow down, not just when you're sleeping, you know, because that's not really, that's sleeping, but consciously choosing slowing down, or stopping what you're doing just to not distract, you know, and just be with your breath, takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of courage, I think, you know. And this yang way of business, or the yang way of, I get caught up in that too. It's like, I need to do more, I need to do this, I got to get this out. It's like when I step back and sort of allow more, you know, my feminine to be in more at the forefront, then things just come, you know. You become more of a magnet to everything, you know, because you're allowing it there, you know. You're not taking or forcing it. It's like going against the grain, you know. It's like it never works out like we want it to. But when we can stop for a moment and just let the next thing kind of show itself, you know what I mean, like emerge, that approach has always worked better for me. And in relationships, you know, when I'm soft, everything is a lot easier. When I'm a little hard, and in that part of me that wants to fight, you know, protect and be, things aren't always as smooth, right? So it's the same thing in everything. I need a little bit of that, and I also need a little bit more of the, you know, can I be more yin?
Yeah, it's like walking, it's like doing the dance, or walking the line of
and not taking everything so personally, right? It's like that part of me really gets upset. So I'm learning to love her too, right? And she needs a lot of yin.
Yes. I love that you actually make a point to not say that it's like that I do this. It's like that part of me does this. And that's actually really powerful. Can you speak to that?
I can. I feel like this is part of that journey I talked about before, about the shadow part of us, you know, that we all have these sort of parts of self. And then there is this sort of main part of the self that we want to be in, where we're present. We'll call it self-leadership. And the other parts are just sort of along the way, from early days, even pre-verbal, we've learned different ways of being in the world, of surviving in the world, of how do we receive love, how do we not receive love, how do we not get in trouble, how do we, you know. And so all these experiences have created, if you can imagine, these little tiny sort of parts of us that get activated at certain times, or have been very deeply buried, you know. And so it's called IFS, this type of kind of therapy that people use, that I do with a friend of mine. We actually have a beautiful exchange going. I do breath work with her, and she does IFS. It's the best.
Amazing.
So we have a group, actually, which I'm so excited about, in January, starting in January, a women's only, but which can be all identifying women. But we want to kind of keep it in that vein of sort of that circle of safe kind of environment, where we're going to do IFS and breath work in a group setting. So sort of witnessing others go through the parts as well. Are you familiar with IFS?
Yeah. So
the internal family system.
Exactly. I was just going to say, we should probably clarify what that means.
Yeah. Internal family systems.
Yes. It is a very fascinating approach to things, and it goes along the whole idea of I am not my thoughts, I am the awareness of my thoughts. That, you know, it's in the internal family systems bit was the part that I at first was a little bit confused about.
Yeah, it's confusing. Yeah,
but it's the internal family, as in like you have many different parts of yourself,
right? Yeah, and they're all squabbling with each other, and some are collaborating, some are. So when you really see yourself in that way, not the I, like I used to think I'm just the sum of the whole, and like that's it, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm going to judge myself harshly for all that. There's going to be a very loud fire truck going by here. So, but when you actually learn to soften to those parts, you know, that are activated for whatever reason, you know, then you can sort of befriend those parts a little bit more, and you see yourself not as that thing. You learn to not identify as just that part that's being activated in that moment. You can step aside and really get clear and more conscious, and like take a deep breath and go, okay, what is this part that's being activated right now? Instead of saying, I'm a bad person because blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking this way. I'm doing this thing. I hate the way I act around certain people or whatever. Instead of saying, I wonder which part is being activated right now. You know, by that. Like, and I can use an example in real time. I was asked to do this amazing event the other day in front of over 100 people. This pre-lockdown, clearly.
Yeah.
And I'm normally amazing at standing in front of lots of people. And when I'm in my center and I over-prepared, there's a part of me that really wanted to do such a good job for her. I respect and love her so much. And I thought, I just want to be so prepared. I'm going to do this. So a part of me didn't trust, you know, that I had this, you know, and could show up and just be spontaneous and read the room like I do a yoga class and lead this little, very short, brief centering exercise. Well, I showed up and I don't know what happened, but I got triggered. A part of me got triggered and I completely froze. I did not sleep for 2 nights after that because I don't know what I even said. I didn't do it. I didn't do anything that I wanted to. I was a complete mess. I sat there and just froze, you know, fight, flight, freeze. Well, I froze and I felt so embarrassed. I felt humiliated. I was like, and that did not help all the other parts. They're like, I told you so. You're so blah, blah, blah. But when I really looked at it, I had to kind of take it apart and go, okay, there's a part of me that just really wanted to do a good work, you know, and how do I feel about her? You know, when you ask the question in that way, how do I feel about that part? It sort of softens you immediately instead of going, I hate that. Like, can that part see the self? You know, can you witness it? And then ask for permission to kind of have like a little conversation, you know, like, what's going on? What happened? Well, I got really insecure. I felt like I'm not good enough to be there. Like I'm not, you know, pretty enough, or like this is all a makeup event. These people aren't here to listen to me talk about, you know, getting grounded in their body. So I fucking lost it. And then the other part of me that just wanted to be liked, you know what I mean? Like it was just a fucking mess. Like I was all over the place with all the parts, and they were all in charge. And meanwhile, here I am trying to teach getting grounded, and I am not, you know, and so I felt humiliated. So I've been working with that for a while now, for the last couple of weeks, you know, but it's also good learning, you know, it's like, okay, in real time, can I forgive myself for that part of me that really wanted to be well liked? And that's familiar, you know, I've always wanted to be liked. So what part of me is that, you know, and just really see that she's just like a little girl, you know, that never really felt like she belonged anywhere, you know. Growing up in a small town, I always felt different. I don't know. It's just complicated, right? But when you approach it in that way with more loving kindness or compassion, which I've not been good at until recently, then it's much nicer. And you can be nicer to yourself.
Yeah, and I feel like actually a way that you can truly work through things, as opposed to how I personally feel like most of us do it, is to repress it and then it eventually show up like, or be reactive.
Yeah.
And that's where oh,
Honey,
pops into like
yes.
Gabor Mate stuff, you know, like
Yes,
physical
trauma. Hmm.
manifestations of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and trauma. We all have trauma, big T, little t. You know,
Yes.
what's traumatic to one person could be completely devastating to another. Like that wouldn't be devastating to one person could be devastating. Maybe if it's an emotional trauma, maybe the way your parents spoke to you, or where you thought you didn't deserve to be loved, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, we're all walking around traumatized people, unless you've done a lot of work. And have you noticed that all those people who are our teachers, like um, even Byron Katie or like Debbie Ford, they were literally had moments of lying on the ground in desperation,
Yeah.
like Eckhart Tolle, sitting on a park bench with nothing, like to the point of just like losing everything, to find yourself, that
Yeah.
concept. And you have to be willing to kind of like be vulnerable enough, that's the hard word, to kind of lose everything,
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me a little bit of Nietzsche and a philosophy that he had about like the Superman like at the top of the mountain, and that your journey to become Superman or to be enlightened or whatever term you want to use is to go through all these challenges and trying to walk up the mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
And
kind
the
of the
view up
cool
there is
concept.
beautiful.
Yeah, right, like the
Yeah.
things that you learn and uncover, and
Hmm.
as messy as things can be, and as painful as like things can be in our lives,
Yeah.
I do believe that, like what we were talking about earlier, that nothing happens by coincidence, and um, I do believe that there's a lot of power in having painful experiences as opposed to being victimized by them and feeling like,
Yeah.
oh, like why did this happen to me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that victimized part is just a part of you,
yeah,
that has learned that's, just protecting you,
yeah,
like protecting you from feeling it again. So
exactly.
when you look at it that way, and then you just sort of say, "Oh, thank you, for protecting me. This I don't need you anymore," or whatever. You can talk to it in that way. There's ways of talking to yourself, the parts, that where you can. And in IFS, they talk about the exile, which is usually like a little more younger part of you that all these protectors are protecting, right? And
Yeah,
that's a really hurt or unlovable part or whatever. And those protectors spend a lot of time, protecting this little one, like
yeah,
literally like an infant, who's just helpless. And so we walk around as all these parts protecting these little exiles inside of us that are through no fault of our own, no one's fault, just the way we've been, our psyches work,
yeah,
there's nothing to be afraid of when we start to look inside. I think that's the first step, is like acknowledging that you don't have to be scared to kind of meet those parts, that we all
yeah,
have them. We're all the same. And when you
yeah,
see it that way, like I can look at you and go, you probably have the same parts I do, so then I look at you with more like, love and compassion and openness and clarity and,
yeah. Choosing to be more open with curiosity of like learning more about
yeah,
someone else's experience, even.
that's right. And
Yeah.
also I will say this though, with boundaries, I think boundaries are really important. I think,
Yes.
you can stay, because when you've been hurt, I think that's important to acknowledge that you don't have to be in relationship with certain people if that's,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? It's like I can see them clearly, and I don't need to have that in my life. You know what I mean? I think that's also growing up and saying you can be kind and like whatever, but which is great. But I think boundaries are very important. I think a lot of people, I don't know, I haven't learned those very well. So
Me
I'm
neither.
learning. I'm learning how to get those. I'm learning how to, but when you really respect yourself a lot and you respect those parts of you, it gets easier,
Yes.
because you really are protecting yourself in a different way. It's not like, oh, I'm going to put up the wall. It's more, okay, I'm seeing clearly. I see you. And I also choose not to have this. be in my
Exactly.
environment. You know what I mean? Because I
Yeah.
know what that feels like, and I don't want to subject myself to that. I think that's valid. I think that's really important.
I think that's so well said too. Cause like, yeah, boundaries I feel like are kind of tricky to understand if you don't know what a boundary looks like.
How have you been taught? Maybe you haven't
Right?
been taught what they are. Like, there's a lot of families that are boundaryless, and we don't know.
Hmm.
How do we know? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good one. It's a
Well,
good one,
right?
Jillian. When you figure it out, you tell me how. I think I am figuring it out. I just think I need to trust. That's the other thing. Trusting like how it feels and noticing that, yes, that's a part of me that is a protector that's like really
Hmm.
kind of digging in its heels, or is this really just self leadership, knowing from a seat of wisdom in the body that this is not a healthy situation?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also like I'll add to that too, if what popped up when you said that is um giving yourself permission to walk away from things as opposed to feeling like you need to suck it up. That sucking it up and pursuing like whatever it is, if that person wanted you to do
Yeah.
something, something simple like that you really didn't want to do, um as opposed to saying no. Saying no is not a weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, looking at it that way as well, of what's best for me is also best for you.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
understanding that is a boundary too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And not doing it for other people, not even though it would please them, it's
Mm,
really, again, taking that self leadership. Like, what does that really look like for me? Because you're not going to be of service to anyone if you're not really looking
yeah.
after yourself. It's not
Yeah.
selfish. I think that's especially as a mom, to be like, oh, I'm going to do this thing. It's not going to, yeah, it depends on how you do it. That's something I struggle with a lot.
Yeah.
That's,
Martyrdom and
yeah.
trying
And,
to
and
work through that.
guilt. Guilt
Yeah.
is a big one. I know we haven't even talked about breath work, but I actually, can I ask you a question? Have you tried breath work, with like the kind that I've been leading, the breath work?
um I've dabbled like just slightly in it, but it's
Yeah.
definitely something that I know
Yeah.
it would be helpful
So
in
next
my
time we do it
life.
online, I want you to try it, or we can just do a session for you and I'd love to
Yeah.
offer you one for doing this podcast. And maybe just if I could touch on that, because it is
Yes,
accessing the
please.
sympathetic nervous system, which is unique in the types of breath work, which is an umbrella term. As yogis, we know pranayama is more like a tapping into the parasympathetic nervous system, right? Slowing
Okay.
down the breath. Whereas the opposite of opposite, the kind I'm leading is the opposite of that. It's deeper breaths, oxygenating the body a great deal, like almost to the point
Cool.
of like your body chemistry changes, right? So you're breathing in and out of your mouth, which is different, and making a circle with your breath. So no gap between the inhale and the exhale for like 30 minutes minimum.
Wow.
Yeah, you can do it for 15. You still get the same kind of benefits, but laying down to some music and just allowing your nervous system to kind of step out of the way. It's almost like your mind gets to quiet down. So that critical part of the brain starts to get quiet, just like you were microdosing psychedelics, for example. It's the
Right.
same sort of chemistry that happens in the body. They've done research on this, on like mushrooms, on
Cool.
how that opens up and lights up different parts of the brain where you see the self more clearly. And this is exactly what happens in breathwork. You have moments of self forgiveness. You see almost like a helicopter view of self and all its parts, like what's really important and what's really true. And, it's so healing. And physically speaking, that tension, we get to melt some of that tension away from the body, all that baggage that's kind of, I lead people through, I talk through it a little bit, just allowing, sort of doing prompts, reminding people to breathe, and also releasing, that kind of whatever is no longer serving us through the breath. And it's very powerful. I find it's been really amazing for me to lead people through that. In my own practice, I do it. Well, my partner's great at reminding me. He's like, let's lay down and breathe. At lunchtime, we sometimes lay down for lunch and do a breath work together. And it's been remarkable because when we have like resentment that's building or just any tension, individually, physically, we lay down and we breathe together, and it's been amazing.
I love that so much. And I love that you mentioned about so I have microdosed before, and I did it
tell me about that.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I think more in the beginning I noticed a difference, and then I think you need to be doing, like, you can't just microdose and not do all the other stuff, right?
Yeah. But do you know what?
Purpose.
I'll tell you is that this is a drug-free alternative to having the same experience. Mm-hmm. I can't say because I've never done microdose mushrooms or done that. I don't do any of that, but I know that people have, and it's very valuable experience. You know, I've seen people doing it, and I've seen how open their minds are, you know, right, and their hearts are. But doing breathwork is a similar experience without having to do the microdosing. So you can do it all by yourself, you know, but you can once you've done it a few times, you know. I even have a recording that people can purchase on my website where once you've done it a few times and you feel comfortable, you can actually listen to the audio recording and lay down and breathe. So it's really cool.
That's amazing. That's actually so helpful because I find like microdosing definitely comes with its list of concerns for people, and it's not like I will say though that when you are microdosing, you don't really know it, like you're not hallucinating. It's such a small dose that it's like a supplement you take in the morning.
You just feel more
aware,
aware. Yeah, it's like a portal that opens. And I tell people this in breathwork. It's like, be curious, be open, be willing to step on the other side. So and it's funny because when you feel the very tense people like come in maybe and breathe, and in the beginning for me too, I felt it more physically, you know. But then the more sometimes the deeper layers, it's like the koshas in yoga. You know, for me it's like the Anamaya kosha, you know what I'll talk about. Maybe your listeners will have to search that up, but there's these 5 layers to the self, right? There's the Anamaya kosha, which is the body, the prana kosha, and then there's the, you know, the wisdom, brain, emotional, and then you keep going into self, right? So what I feel breathwork is this, which is, that's my logo. That's how I developed that. It was like this feeling of moving towards the center, you know, cutting through. And one of the ways, and in yoga as well, to get very present is just to be with your breath. And so it's almost like speeding up that process of meditation, you know, times 10. Yeah. You know, because you're so present with just that breath, and the body feels so weird. You know what I mean? Like there's tingling, there's all this stuff going on. So your nervous system is like, and so, but your mind then starts to open up.
That is fascinating.
I wish I could explain it better, Jillian. I am so bad at explaining all of this. I feel like people just need to try it, and like it's the unexplained. You know, people then go, "Oh, I totally get why you can't explain this."
Yeah, it's like you'll know what she means when you do it.
Yeah, and then you have to have a lot of trust, right? You have to trust me. You have to trust your body. You have to trust your breath. You have to trust that everything is totally going to go back to normal. Like you have claw hands sometimes and really tense hands, and people are like, oh my God, have panic, you know? Yeah. Totally understandable. Yeah.
Amazing.
But it's fascinating. Yeah.
I love that. I think this is a good to end on that. Mm-hmm. And I'll link below on your website so that people are able to find that. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah. And Jillian, we'll do one together, you and I.
Yes, I would love to. Before we go, is there one last piece of advice, anything you'd like to share?
I think it's just being really aware of that your thoughts are not who you are, and being kind and compassionate. I'm on this journey of trying, to be more soft and easy and yin-like with myself. And I just think once you really understand that you are not all those parts, that you are fully lovable and, the innocent child of a very generous universe, then you know that all is well. Trust that.
Yes, trust.
Trust that.
It's a good way to end this conversation.
It is a good way. Yeah. Maybe that's my word for 2022.
Trust.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Jillian.
All right, friends. I hope you guys got just as much out of that podcast episode as I did. I am still really thinking a lot about the breath work bit, and I know that I will definitely be pursuing doing some more breath work stuff in my daily practice of healing, in my daily practice of learning how to be more comfortable with myself, and healing through things in my life that need to be healed. We all have our stuff, right? We all have our suitcase. It's so many tools and so many great insights that were mentioned in there. So I hope you guys, like I said, got just as much out of that podcast episode as I did. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying in touch and keeping around on this podcast. I appreciate it so very much. Your support means the world to me. And I'm just so grateful for all of you. So thank you so very much.